joined once again by Geoff Kimmerly. He is the Communications Director at the MHSAA, or the Michigan High School Athletics Association, and he joins us again now on the MegaCast. Geoff, thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. How are you today?
Doing all right. How are you?
Hanging in there.
Good. So we are in the thick of the fall sports season. We're nearing playoff time, or have entered playoff time in the fall season across the state of Michigan. It's a lot different of a situation than it was a year ago. It's still a very intricate situation. It's still complicated for athletic directors, certainly for the MHSAA as well. But are things going smoother this year than they had a year ago?
Yeah, I of course wouldn't say we're completely back to normal. Obviously, COVID is still out there, and we're still feeling the effects of that. But things are certainly different than they were a year ago. We had a number of games last year in every sport canceled because of COVID. We've still had some of those this year, but in football, which we track every result because of playoff points and postseason qualification, it's about half as many have been because of COVID this season as opposed to last season. Golf, for example, in the fall for girls for Lower Peninsula last season was a one-day tournament because we didn't want teams that had to travel far away, staying overnight, things like that. We're back to having our traditional two-day tournament. Our boys tennis finals are this weekend in the Lower Peninsula. We're back to having our traditional format for that after changing things up a year ago as well. So we were able to get a lot of things back to, quote unquote normal. But at the same time, we're still building back up from a year ago. That took a toll on everyone in a lot of different ways, and high school athletics was certainly among those.
We're joined by Geoff Kimmerly. He's the Communications Director for the Michigan High School Athletic Association, or the MHSAA. Talking about the continuation of the fall sports season, has yet to have any sort of a stoppage, as opposed to last season where there were multiple stoppages due to COVID-19. But like you said, things are not back to normal, and in high school football in particular, there are some similarities last year. And there was an article from MLive. Patrick Nothaft of MLive wrote an article recently about COVID's contribution to a record number of forfeits so far this season due to COVID-19 and other factors as well. It's not just COVID. So far, 74 games have been decided via forfeit. According to the MHSAA's online database, that is only the second highest single season total in comparison to, of course, last season, where there were 94 in a shortened 6-week regular season and playoff period. How is this becoming a problem? Has this been a growing problem across the state with having these forfeits going on? How may that impact the continuation of the season, especially the way that the playoffs are situated through the MHSAA?
Sure. When it comes to the playoffs, this shouldn't affect anything. Unfortunately, we could certainly have a COVID-affected situation where we have to have a forfeit during the playoffs. We had a number of those last season as well. So that's something that, perhaps we should anticipate. But these other reasons that really have contributed to probably about half of our forfeits this year, those things are usually out of the way by the time we get to the playoffs. Every year we have teams that decide when we ask during the spring if you'll have a sport. We have teams say they will, and then they don't, because they find out over the summer they don't have enough interest for participation to be able to have a full varsity team, especially in a sport like football, where you either have 11 or 8 players on the field. It takes substantially more to field a team. So we've had a number of those this year, and that's led to some forfeits. We had 3 teams, I think, total mid-season or right before the season started, moved from 11-player to 8-player football because of numbers. And so that created a number of forfeits there as well. The teams that are receiving forfeit wins in these cases oftentimes do pursue a different game, but with schedules already made well in advance, it's difficult to do. So, as I told Patrick for that story, we have, like I just said, about half as many COVID-related forfeits as we did a year ago. But you add that into the normal stuff, like teams not having enough numbers and things like that, or teams running low on players simply because of injuries as well. That happens every season too. And that's really what's led to where we're at right now with forfeits. Do I think it's going to become a problem that does something to our season this year? No, I don't. We only have 2 weeks left of the regular season. We have found a way to award teams still that have to take a forfeit win, and we are almost to the playoffs. And after that, the teams that are struggling with numbers, for the most part, will not be participating still.
And just for reference, Geoff did mention that teams have been seeking to reschedule with other opponents in the case where they do have a forfeit happen, and in that case, that is done at the local level. That is between the athletic directors of these schools. We're joined by Geoff Kimmerly. He is the communications director at the Michigan High School Athletic Association. Something else that was referenced recently in an article from WXYZ Channel 7 TV is that games such as Mount Clemens and their varsity football homecoming game were cut short, were canceled due to referee shortages. Staffing has been an issue across industries in the state of Michigan, and it really hasn't discriminated against one industry versus the other or one business versus the other. What is the status in terms of referee availability through the MHSAA for fall sports and as we prepare for winter sports at this time?
Well, and that football game, that is really the only varsity football game that I know of that has not been able to be played this season out of about 2,100 games. But there have been soccer games that haven't been able to be played. I would imagine there are other sports that we don't have to track as closely for postseason purposes that have had to cancel events as well. We have had some football games moved to Thursdays because of a lack of available referees. And obviously COVID last year took a toll in all of our sports. In football, I just got the latest updated numbers. So a year ago, we went down about 13% in football registration for officials. We've come back about 3% from that this year, but obviously there's still a long way to rebuild. All of our sports in 2020, 2021 had, I think almost all of them have had some sort of double-digit decrease in officials registrations. So we are trying to rebuild those ranks, obviously, but what we're seeing with football specifically is we're at a point right now where we've still been able to cover all of our varsity games but one this season. But again, some of them have had to be moved to Thursdays. We always have some that are played on Saturdays. And what we've really lost at this point is our flexibility. Last Friday, when those storms were moving across the Lower Peninsula, I was pretty worried because I knew a number of schools would probably have to play deep into the night just so they could keep their officials for that night, because moving to Saturday is not an option when a lot of our officials are also doing college football. That's where we're at now. Our numbers are at a place where we really don't have a lot of flexibility anymore. And that goes back to our recruiting. It goes back to the work we need to do to retain officials and the reasons that officials oftentimes decide not to come back after a year or two.
And what, if already, is in place in terms of, for the hiring process, in terms of incentives, signing bonuses, other benefits that may be there for those that may be interested in joining the ranks of the referees in the MHSAA?
We do a lot of our focusing now on getting younger people involved. We have a legacy program where we work with high schools to identify students who are potentially candidates to become officials. And we do things there where we waive registration and we set those individuals up with mentors and get them involved in local associations and do some things there to create some support and some opportunity at our lowest levels of sport to get some experience and hopefully get them involved in officiating and bring them into that for years to come. Otherwise the incentives are just what you would expect. It's a great way to stay involved in athletics. It's a great way to get some exercise. It's a great way to make hundreds and hundreds of extra dollars. I know some officials who do this almost every night of the week during the spring, and it's a major part of their income. So it really is a great thing to be part of. At the same time, when we try and find out why we have officials leaving after a first year or first couple of years, we hear the same stuff over and over again. A lot of it is dealing with poor spectator behavior. especially for our young officials who are just learning and getting going in something like this. Things have just seemingly gone downhill when it comes to the treatment they receive from the stands. And hopefully people can start to realize that we are at perhaps not a breaking point, but approaching some sort of point where our behavior is going to lead to us not being able to play as much as we'd like to.
We're joined by Geoff Kimmerly. He is the communications director for the Michigan High School Athletic Association, or the MHSAA, with us today on the MegaCast. And Geoff, there's been a lot of discussion recently. There's some viral posts and also some interesting articles and news, such as the Lansing School District raising its GPA requirement for student athletes from 1.67 to a 2.0. Being that the MHSAA understands that most of the student athletes across the state of Michigan, this is the highest level of sport that they will ever play at. There will not most students likely will not play at the collegiate level, certainly at the professional level, and that this is where their athletic career ends. But it's an educational opportunity more than anything. Are there any discussions at the MHSAA or any points of view from the MHSAA on putting a greater emphasis on ensuring that student athletes are putting a really concerted focus on their grades and improving their grades while they're in high school playing these sports?
Well, what the MHSAA does is it creates a minimum where students have to pass 66% of a normal credit load in order to participate. Many schools have higher minimums than that. We give them a baseline. A lot of districts build on that. So, we anticipate that will continue. The reason our baseline is where it is because that allows flexibility to schools that do things differently all over the state. We actually had it a little bit different into 2008, and then a lot of schools began going to a quarter system instead of a semester system. And so we changed things around to go with the 66% of the credit load because that's what our schools wanted to have in order to be able to build on it and do some things. So what we have right there, again, we have the minimum that must be done that allows our schools to build on that specific to their situation. And that's what a lot of schools are doing, Lansing schools included.
Geoff Kimmerly joins us. He is the communications director for the MHSAA. Geoff, just another minute or so with you before we'll say goodbye today. Is there anything else at this moment in time that people should be aware of as we continue through the fall season and approach the winter sports season, or any other information that we haven't discussed yet today?
We're just excited to get deep into the postseason with a lot of these sports. As I mentioned, golf and tennis are finishing up this weekend. As we get into November, obviously, cross country and soccer, and then volleyball and swimming and diving, and finally football at Ford Field. And, while all of this feels a lot more normal than it did, people need to keep in mind that there are some places where there are local restrictions for inside sports, indoor sports. And so they should be paying attention to that if their team is going on the road. And I think people just need to keep in mind that we have so much more even now than we did a year ago when we did take a pretty large break and have to come back in January. And I know I'm certainly not taking that for granted. And I know a lot of people in our athletic community aren't either. And so that's always going to be in the back of my mind as we go into a very busy next 6 weeks.
Well, Geoff, we appreciate your insight on the fall sports season, on some of the continued COVID-related issues that continue to affect our sports here in the state of Michigan at the high school level, and how the MHSAA and our schools are working through those issues. Thanks for your time.
Yep, thanks for having me.